Hey, what is up, mortals? Welcome to Season 3 Part 3 of What If Toga Was in 1A. I just wanted to greet you guys by just saying, sit back and relax, you're in for a treat. So, we begin. Alright, Miss Toga. Last we left off with the things you felt bad about. Today let's focus on your relations with others. The counselor said in a soft tone as he passed in front of the hidden camera on the hair clip in Toga's hair. The teachers watched on from nearby as a purple aura slowly formed around the young girl. As she walked to the couch to sit down, she remained totally silent. The counselor sat across from her. His eyes shined a bright purple so brightly his pupils weren't even visible longer. He stared at her for about 15 minutes before he began to grin widely. There we are. Look at that. Far less time to link fully this time. Good girl. He pressed his pencil to his notepad, ready to take notes. Now, tell me about your parents. Inside Toga's mind, she looked up nervously from her hands that she fidgeted with to see her father's gaze. He sat across from her right next to her mother. As he spoke down to her, Toga in reality spoke in a near emotionless tone. My father always thought I'd try to kill him, and my mother, he believed me to be a monster. Later I managed to make him believe otherwise. But I messed up. I think I lost any chance to make it better again. She explained, still unmoving. Do you agree with his thoughts? The counselor asked as he took his notes. I don't know, but I want to be good for others, even if it hurts sometimes. She replied simply. Vlad tensed up as he watched on, but relaxed mildly as Aizawa placed a hand on his shoulder. What about your other parent? He asked her simply. In Toga's mind, her mother went to speak after her father finished his shouts at her. Before she could, a strong hand gently gripped Toga's shoulder from behind the couch. The young girl looked back to see the figure of Vlad, who gently wiped the tears from her eyes with a gentle smile. Vlad is the father who I always wanted. He makes me believe I can be better and not have to suffer while I do so. He makes me feel safe and loved, Toga said simply. The counselor's eye twitched a bit as Vlad's eyes grew a bit wide, though his face softened with a warm smile at how the girl viewed him. And your other relatives? The counselor tried next. In Toga's head, her mother was guided to her feet by Aizawa. The man led her over to Toga's side of the room. My mother loves me. I scared her, but she loves me. I believe she always will. Aizawa is a super cranky uncle, but very funny. He just wants to help me be my best, she said simply. Stop resisting. He almost growled out under his breath. Your peers, what about them? In her head, the others vanished. Suddenly she was attacked by the students who had transferred out from UA. Toga leapt from the couch to barely dodge the attacks. I had a good relationship with them, but because of me they had to leave UA, she explained calmly. I attacked 2 of them and hurt them. In her head, a wave of explosions pushed back the other students suddenly, while several were suddenly put in wraps. From behind the crowd of students, a distorted version of Uraraka then flipped over the students to run at Toga. It looked at her the same way her friend had in the forest after Toga had attacked her. I hurt the people I loved, Toga continued as the counselor began to grin again. The version of Uraraka in her head hit Toga to the ground hard. However, before she could strike again, another Uraraka came in and pinned the distorted one to the ground. She looked over to Toga with a bright smile as Bakugo and Hitoshi finally came into view to continue to hold back the other students. Izuku then walked over and held out a hand to Toga. Toga smiled up at him and took his hand to help her stand. But they forgave me. I need to make up for what I did, but thanks to them I'm not alone. In her head, Magni and Spinner then stepped in to stand beside Toga and Izuku. I even have friends now who don't mind my monstrous side as well. As Toga continued, the area began to fade. The counselor squinted his eyes in aggravation. The teachers then rushed to move in. You can't be serious, you brat. The man started just as the aura broke and his eyes faded back to normal. I'm perfect the way I am, Toga said now confidently as she came back to her senses. And no one can make me believe otherwise anymore. Guess counseling works after all. She then tilted her head to one side with a stuck-out tongue and grinned. She flipped off the man just in time for her teachers to rush in and capture the man. As the teachers went to escort him out to interrogate him elsewhere, Vlad looked to Toga with a proud smile. Toga smiled back at him just like she used to, brightly and full of playfulness. Toga then followed the teachers out as she walked beside Vlad. So, think I can just train with you and Aizawa from now on? Toga asked curiously. Most definitely, Vlad replied, ruffling her hair. Vlad, she tried to fix her hair. That took me so long to do. Sorry, Vlad said with a small laugh. Elsewhere, Twice walked down an alleyway while he muttered to himself. He occasionally shouted in irritation before one final sigh. That overhaul guy is such a creep. I love him. First sending that guy to mess with that Toga girl, now this of all things. He punched a wall then yelped in pain as he held his fist. They're just kids, and he's hurting them like it's nothing. I know we're all villains, but seriously, torturing a 6-year-old just for a quirk-canceling drug. It's genius. Twice walked off from the alleyway as Spinner watched from the shadows, which he slinked back into shortly after Twice left. Later that night, as All Might left the prison with Aizawa the two-spotted spinner as he stood on a rooftop across the street, the two made their way over cautiously when All Might recognized the man from the other night. Before either could inquire anything, Spinner began to share what he had overheard from Twice. Once he finished, there was one question that lingered in the air for Aizawa. "Why tell us?" Aizawa asked. Spinner locked eyes with All Might for a moment, who knew likely his reasonings, then looked back to Aizawa. "Because I believe you both can stop this as to where I cannot," Spinner explained simply. After a long moment of silence, All Might nodded. "Thank you," All Might said with a bow of his head right before Spinner left. The two teachers knew they should likely have taken the man, and though they also knew they may need his assistance in the future, so for now he let him go. Aizawa then pulled out his phone. The two then contacted several other pros they trusted to get help with investigating the new leads they had. Thankfully, they knew Spinner's leads were likely accurate thanks to the name overhaul matching up with the information they had gotten from the counselor after their interrogation. They needed to act fast though, given the other child that was in trouble, especially when said child was being used to craft a new drug for canceling quirks. Back at the dorms, Toga rubbed her eyes as she got herself a glass of water. She needed to go to bed soon so she would be well rested for school. She decided to get some water before she went to bed due to how thirsty she was. After she got a drink, she turned around to see Uraraka coming down the hall. Uraraka gave her a small wave and a soft smile. Toga gave one back in return. Uraraka grabbed herself a snack as the two decided to sit outside the dorms on the steps to talk while they relaxed before bed. Toga filled Uraraka in on what happened at the Count Clears. Roughly, she avoided some details, but still gave her friend all the information she could. As usual, Uraraka was pretty supportive to her. "I don't like that you had to go through that, but you helped some pros arrest a bad guy. That's actually pretty cool," Uraraka praised with a warm smile. "Yeah, kinda is when you put it that way," Toga replied with a soft smile. Uraraka looked up to the moon and stars as she ate a bit more of her snack. Her hair gently blew in the wind. Its shine grew even more noticeable in the moonlight. Toga blushed softly as she stared at her friend for a while before she sighed and set her water down. "Hey, can I ask you something?" Toga asked as she braced herself a bit. "Yeah, of course," Uraraka replied with a smile, looking back to Toga again. "I can't really sit around not knowing anymore, but I need to know." Toga took a deep breath then spoke again. "Do you like me like I like you?" Uraraka's smile slowly faded as she blushed a bit. Both girls grew serious in their expressions as the question settled in like a wall between them. Unlike Toga, Uraraka had almost forgotten that she had never addressed her friend's question from what felt like centuries ago. Uraraka slowly lowered the bowl that held her snack. "I don't think I do. I'm sorry." "Yeah, I figured as much," Toga said as her heart sank a bit. Uraraka looked at her friend's heartbroken expression and teared up a bit. "Himiko, I'm really sorry." It's just Uraraka tried to come up with something more to say, but couldn't. "It's okay." Toga teared up as well, but managed a sad smile. "You like what you like, Achako. No one can ever change the things we like, you know. Not even ourselves." Toga gently pulled her into a hug. "I just needed to know for a fact what you liked is all. I can't be upset with you for being honest. It hurts, but it'll get better. I know that for a fact now that everything will always get better eventually with time," Toga said gently. "So we'll be okay?" Uraraka asked softly as she slowly hugged her friend back. "Of course they will." She snorted a bit. "After everything, do you really think you not liking me back would be the thing that breaks us apart?" Uraraka thought about it and laughed a bit. "I guess I did. I'm glad I was wrong," Uraraka said gently before the two gently pulled away from the hug. "See you tomorrow in class," Toga offered as she grabbed her water before she stood up. "See you then," Uraraka said with a warm smile and wiped a tear from her cheek. Toga made her way inside and put the dirty glass away before she bowed her head with a sigh. She gently patted her cheeks before she made her way back to her room. She looked down to all her stuffed animals all over the place before she came up with an idea. A bit later, Toga laid in her bed under her covers with just her head poking out. All around her on the bed were towering piles of stuffed animals, and a few tucked in beside her under the covers. "This is a perfect amount of stuffed animals." She squinted her eyes a bit. "You know nothing, Mina." The next day at school, the announcement about the provisional license was made to the remaining students that now made up the new class of 1A. The class had been formed with the remaining students of Class 1A and 1B. The major difference was Aizawa's never-ending pain that came about when the new stream of chaos inhabited the room. Kirishima and Tetsutestu were broing it out while Monoma professed his half of the class superiority. Kendo was then busy with her assault of Monoma. And finally Vlad trying to deal with Bakugu's shouts of how he planned to murder several of the 1B students out of annoyance that competed with Ida's shouting in hopes to quiet the students. So pretty close to canon, just far less focused until the big three came in. When it came to the fight with Mirio, things were pretty one-sided perusal to the canon. All until Hitoshi asked Mirio a question, then told him to stop moving long enough for Izuku to get one hit in. then returned to its previous one-sided trick when Mirio knew Hitoshi's trick. At the end of the fight, Vlad promptly asked the boy to find his clothes, while Toga did her utmost best not to comment after a look from both Aizawa and Vlad. After school, Toga left with Aizawa and Vlad to the gym, where they began to slowly try to work on Toga's quirk, as well as her issue with blood through practice and slowly increasing exposure. At first it had been pretty tough given the obvious, though over the next week they managed to get it to a more calm manner. She still had her usual feelings, though she could now control them to where it didn't make her lash out, which had been a bit of an issue when they tried exposure to larger amounts of blood at first. That weekend, Toga even managed to get herself to go shopping with the other girls for the soon coming colder weather. As she shopped, she spotted Spinner, who watched her from afar with a concerned look. Toga couldn't help but smile a bit at how the man who had seemed so concerned for her. She held up a thumbs up to him when the other girls were distracted, which seemed to ease the man's nerves a tad. Not by much, but enough to leave the girl to it. Meanwhile, Shigaraki met up with Overhaul to talk over his upcoming favor, and he would need help with it soon. Overhaul, who was beyond pleased with his progress in his own work, agreed given his original plan had failed as well. He had noticed heroes starting to linger around his area more, so he told Shigaraki how he wouldn't be able to help him as greatly as he'd like, but would still give him some support. Shigaraki of course wished for more help, though took what he could. For the next few weeks everyone worked their hardest. The students were training. The pros were on the hunt for information on Overhaul as well as planning to make their move. The villains on furthering their own plans. And finally Aizawa on his attempts at not having a brain aneurysm towards the new chaos that came forth every time he had thought he snuffed it all out in the class. Finally the day came that the students were loaded into a bus to head to the provisional licenses test. On the way, Toga sat with Uraraka as she texted her mother about how she was about to take her test. Her relationship was still mildly strained, though thankfully due to Vlad's honest updates on her. Her mother had been far less nervous when texting or calling her. Toga's attention was pulled to Bakugo, who struggled in his attempts to assault Monoma. The other student was once again gloating. Kendo handled Monoma quickly per usual, and laughed with Momo and some of the other girls, while Bakugo was calmed down by Deku, Kirishima, and Tetsu. Toga laughed with Uraraka as they watched on. Uraraka did her best to hide it around Toga, though Toga could notice her friend blushing at Izuku. Toga took a deep breath before she smiled softly to Uraraka. She then spoke just loud enough for her to hear, and her alone. "Hey, it's okay. If you want to go for him now, I won't get jealous," Toga said with a giggle at Uraraka's blush growing brighter. "Are you sure you're not going to try to ask him out?" Uraraka asked, a bit confused and flustered. "Nah." Toga smiled a bit sadly for a moment before she smiled brightly again as she caught a glimpse of Izuku's own smile at Uraraka. "I don't think I'm his type either. Besides, I'd rather see you with someone I know would do anything to keep you safe," Toga said with a bit of a playful wink at the end, which only got Uraraka more flustered. Toga giggled at her, then hopped over towards Izuku's seat. Izuku smiled at Toga despite his confusion at her sudden arrival. She then sent him over to sit with Uraraka, which only caused them both to blush like crazy. Toga smiled at them a bit. As much as she wished she could be over there as well with them both, she knew that the two would likely enjoy it being just the two of them, even if the two were too awkward to do much more than talk about the upcoming test and the weather. "You're even weirder than I thought you were," Bakugo muttered from the seat in front of her. "Yeah, I know, hothead." Toga shrugged as she watched the two. "Even if I can't have them the way I want, I don't want to keep them from having something that makes them both happy. Besides, there's probably plenty of other people out there for me. I'm sure I'll have plenty of people lining up to date me soon enough," Toga said as a joke. "PFFT, yeah, right," Bakugo retorted with a scoff. "Oh, like you got people lining up to date you? You seem like someone who gets less attention than the Firefox browser," Toga snorted out. "Boy," Bakugo stood up to yell at her tease. "I get plenty of offers from people unlike you." "Yeah, Bakugabro gets plenty of attention." Kirishima popped up with a proud smile. "A true man like him has more offers than you could ever imagine." Toga looked from Kirishima to Bakugo with raised brows. "Don't look at me in that tone of voice, freak," Bakugo shouted angrily. "I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't imply anything," she said with a monotone voice despite her smirk. "I was just looking at two totally platonic bros." "Yeah, you better be, you freak." Bakugo then sat with a huff, shortly joined by Kirishima after. Toga let out a snort and sat with a soft smile as she looked out the window the rest of the way to the testing grounds. Once they were there, Toga made her way out with the others after she checked her phone. Bother Aizawa and Vlad had sent her good luck texts. Toga smiled happily before she looked over to All Might, who gave her a thumbs up as he led some students to their designated area. Toga gave one back as she looked over to see their old classmates talking with the others happily. Toga joined up with them to talk. "Yeah, the best part about the new school is this girl named Kami," Minda said to Denki as he pointed over to the girl talking to a bunch of others. "She's such a super hottie." "Oh bro, totally," Denki approved happily. Oh yeah, total hottie. I'd kill to look like that. Cute hat too. Toga chimed in before she left. Wait, what? Both Minta and Denki called out after her, confused. Meanwhile, elsewhere the heroes moved into position. They needed to remain cautious given how recently a lot of people they had been watching went off the grid. It was concerning, though also put them at the advantage for their planned assault. At the same time, Shigaraki watched the students file into the building to take their test with a large collection of others. He just needed to wait for the right moment to strike. Thank you all for sticking around, and I hope that you enjoyed it. Before you leave, we would just like to let you know that We the Celestials has many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you'll need is right below here in the description, so feel free to check out all the other incredible projects our team creates. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's all for today's video, so goodbye and have a divine day.